Hey everyone, welcome back to the History Shorts. Today we're diving into one of the most iconic and myth shrouded moments in American history. I'm talking about the Battle of Little Bighorn. With 2026 marking the 150th anniversary of that fateful day in June of 1876, I'm thrilled to be joined by best-selling author, historian, and award-winning journalist, Tom Clavin. Tom is a number one New York Times best-selling co-author of books like The Heart of Everything That Is, and he's written extensively on the American West. His latest book, called Vengeance: The Last Stands of Custer, Crazy Horse, and Sitting Bull, offers a fresh, gripping retelling through 95 short, vivid vignettes that bring the human stories on all sides to life. Instead of the usual Hollywood heroics, Tom explores the vengeance cycles, cultural clashes, leadership decisions, and tragic consequences that defined this clash, from the triumphs on the battlefield to the devastating long term impact on the Plains Indians. I hope you guys enjoyed today's conversation. Tom, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
This is awesome. So, what inspired you to write Vengeance now? Do you think the 150th anniversary has anything to do with it, or was this kind of like I wanted to get there, so I'm finally going to sit down and make this story happen on page?
The real reason behind it is that a few years ago, a friend of mine named Peter approached me and said, would you collaborate with me on a limited series called Crazy Horse and Custer?" And he'd been producing it with Disney for years. And so we started working on that. And we did wrote the scripts for 6 episodes, the pitch, and we couldn't get anybody interested to buy it. And which surprised us because you really have somebody as dynamic a character as Custer is, and as memorable an event as Little Bighorn. There's been very little done dramatically, since Errol Flynn and they died with their boots on. So it occurred to me, with the 150th anniversary coming up, if I could do a book version of it, which is not the exact same thing as the screen version, but that might generate some interest in the screen project. But even if it didn't, it is the 150th anniversary, so that should be commemorated in some way. And the other thing is, I was sort of channeling a previous book I did with Bob Drury called "The Heart of Everything That Is." I wanted to make sure there was a more balanced view of the events, that it was very much from the Sioux and Cheyenne side as well. So there's a combination of factors, and my publisher, thankfully, St. Martin's Press, said, "Yeah, let's go for it."
And I love the unique structure of the book because this is not structured in your like traditional thematic sections. It's more of this vignettes. Can you explain how you came up with that particular structure and how that particular structure kind of lend itself to this story?
I wish I could say I was brilliant enough that I thought about this right from the beginning, but I didn't. As I was laying out the clothesline, so to speak, of the story, I realized that there's so many moving parts, especially as you get into the events leading to and the battle itself with the Little Bighorn. And there's so many characters, so many moving parts that I almost had to do it in shorter chapters to be almost like cinematic. It's like you have to cut from Major Reno and what he's doing. You have to cut to Captain Benteen. You have to cut to Custer. You have to cut to Sitting Bull. You have to cut to Crazy Horse. You have to cut to, one of the other warriors, chiefs in there. So I found as I was writing, my chapters were getting shorter. And at first I said, well, that's not the way things are usually done. I mean, is it okay to have like a 2 or 3 page chapter? And I said, but it reads right.
So your editor said, let's be a little experimental about this.
It's okay to be experimental. And so I said, okay, let's go for it. And then when he read the manuscript, he said it really works because it's a page turner and you're able to not have to cut from different characters within chapters, which can be confusing. You could have a 10-page chapter, but you have 3 different scenes, only because you want to have a chapter that's not less than 10 pages. Heck with it. Let's go. If a 3-page chapter is a 3-page chapter.
So if you had the ability, if you think of this, because it does, as you mentioned, it kind of goes from scene to scene to scene. It is kind of like a visual, even though I'm reading it, I feel like I'm visualizing as I'm reading it. If you were to create like a trailer for your book and you could drop a reader into an action one vignette, one story, anywhere in your book, beginning, middle, end, if you could just drop them to give them like that quick taste of what they're going to expect from your book. Can you think of a story you would drop them into?
Well, I can only tell you the as you were asking that question, the very first scene that occurred to me takes place during the June 25 Battle of Little Bighorn, 1876. And Custer's battalion has been reduced to not that many men and only a couple of companies left. And Crazy Horse decides he's going to ride right through the troopers because he believes he cannot be hit by bullets. And he does that. And they're shooting at him. He not only rides right through them in the heat of battle, in the middle of the battle, then he comes back and rides through them to back where he was. And it's true, the bullets they're firing at him, sometimes point blank range, and he's completely untouched. So I think that's an example of the battle itself, and an example of what a tremendous warrior the Crazy Horse was.
Yeah. Imagine, and the word crazy, in his name, right? You could think of like riding into battle. I mean, by today's standards, by modern standards, which obviously presentism is an enemy of a historian, but like that seems kind of crazy to do that,
Yeah,
right?
but he did that more than once, not necessarily in this battle, but against enemies before, where he'd be, you know, like I say, in this belief that he could, in the dream, he had seen that he could not be touched by bullets, which he never was actually. That's not the way he died. That he could totally intimidate and frighten his enemies and remain untouched, and he did that more than once.
That's amazing. So you have these larger than life figures here. Even I mean, Custer has been animated so much in pop culture. How did you go about stripping away some of these layers of myth making when it came to these characters or anyone in particular?
Well, you go back to contemporaneous sources, you go back to the more reliable research, and you find out that Custer was this larger than life character, and deservedly so. So he is a mythical character, but he's a mythical character because in real life, he did a lot of myth making kind of things. He really did. He was a pivotal player in the Battle of Gettysburg. He was the chief Indian fighter the United States Army had in the West in the 1860s and 1870s. He was journalists would follow him all around. He and his wife were like the Bill and Hillary of the 1870s. They were celebrities. If they went to the theater in New York, there were headlines about that. So I think Custer, if anything, he sort of suffered over the years. I mean, he had this romantic portrayal of him in the 1941 film They Die with Their Boots On, with Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland playing George and Libby Custer. And then since then, I think it's more likely that Custer's been demeaned on screen and in some print versions too. I think one of the most egregious examples is in the movie Little Big Man, the Dustin Hoffman movie, where you have Custer played by Richard Mulligan as going insane during the battle. A ludicrous portrayal of him. So I think Custer, on what he actually did do, the frolicking with his brothers, the courage in battle, he loved leading from the front. There's enough there to make him a dynamic, interesting character without resorting to the fabrications.
He was also very you mentioned this in throughout the book. He was very like media savvy for his time.
Yes,
It's like he knew for posterity what image he wanted to portray.
exactly. I mean, on his expeditions, he actually provided wagons for reporters to accompany him. His expedition into the Black Hills in 1874. He knew the significance of this expedition, and he wanted it chronicled, and he wanted to be able to get it straight from him, not be back in St. Louis or Chicago and getting reports.
So shifting over to the Native American side, when you think of Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, was there anything that, as you were reading the primary and secondary evidence of all this and sources, was there anything that kind of stopped you when it came to those two guys, where you're like, oh, well, this is when you kind of became like the fan of history, not just the writer of history, where you came across something with these two characters where you were like, oh, this is cool. You kind of geeked out a little bit in a sense.
I think the dynamic between Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull is interesting because, I mean, Crazy Horse is such a dramatic character, such a mystic and a mysterious person, um, with his visions and his belief that he could not be killed in battle. Um, he originally was teamed up with Red Cloud, the chief of Lakota Sioux, along with Red Cloud, who in 1866 began, not surprisingly, what was called Red Cloud's War. And Crazy Horse, Red Cloud was the strategist, and Crazy Horse was the field general. When soon after the Red Cloud's War was over, Red Cloud decided we can't beat the white man. I'm going to retire. Crazy Horse was not thinking the same way. He had to find some other person who would take the part of Red Cloud in his life, an older warrior who still had that fire in the belly and still believed that resistance was not futile. And he found that in Sitting Bull. And Sitting Bull, in turn, found somebody who was not necessarily a son to him, but who was, Sitting Bull would say jump, and Crazy Horse would say how high. Sitting Bull would say attack, and Crazy Horse says I'm on it. And I think that their relationship was a very interesting relationship because they, again, not father and son, almost like uncle and nephew, but it was Crazy Horse was somebody who believed in Sitting Bull, and always felt that the two of them still had a chance to save what was left of the Lakota Sioux.
And it's interesting too, because you definitely get that vibe from your book that it doesn't just end, with the battle, but the fact that this is a victory and a massive loss as well, right? For Native Americans. Can you elaborate on that?
Initially, the massive loss, of course, was the U.S. Army because they lost not just they did not lose an entire regiment, the 7th Cavalry, but Custer died along with, I think it's something like 200 something men, 230 men along those lines. Uh, you know, it'd be hard pressed to think of another loss of that magnitude on American soil. The Alamo, but that was like, I think, 100 or less men. The Fetterman Massacre or fight in 1866, that was a loss of 81 men. But here you had well over 200. And also, you had, when Fetterman was killed with his command, nobody knew who the heck Fetterman was. He was a good soldier, but nobody knew who he was. Custer was the poster boy for the Indian fighter of the American West. And it was expected that when he returned covered in glory, that he might get the Democratic nomination and run for president against Rutherford B. Hayes, who eventually won. So it was a gobsmacked event that he died along his command. However, that victory gave way to the army and the American public saying, "We need vengeance. We have to make up for this." So the accelerated that they started to put the different tribes on reservations. Um, Crazy Horse was murdered a little over a year later. Sitting Bull went into exile, and eventually he was killed down the road. And you had the ultimate vengeance, which was Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, which effectively ended the Plains Wars.
The one kind of poetic thing here is Comanche, right? The only surviving horse. Which again, if to me it was like, wait, oh wow, but like, what is that story? The story of this one horse and how it's buried and how it's glorified say about how we choose, or at least we at the time chose to remember those events.
Comanche's an interesting character, even though he's a four-legged one. He was the horse that was being ridden by Captain Miles Keogh, who was an Irishman who has been with the 7th Cavalry for years, and was part of the Custer clan, his inner circle of subordinates. And Comanche, during the Battle of Little Bighorn, was wounded numerous times. Miraculously, when the reinforcements arrived and were surveying all the dead men in the battlefield, there was Comanche still alive. And so he actually was nursed back to health, became a ceremonial horse that would attend state funerals. And when he eventually died, I think he was like 20 something years old. Instead of burying him or incinerating him, they stuffed him. And to this day, you can find Comanche. I think it's Ohio University in the library, one of the museums, something like that. You can visit the horse ridden by Miles Keogh in the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Isn't that crazy? Right?
One of the little tidbit facts that most people don't know.
Yeah.
Another tidbit fact, if you have a second, is it wasn't just a disaster for Custer being killed, but it was a disaster for the Custer family. He died. Two brothers died. A nephew died. A brother-in-law died.
That's one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that in his under his command were his brothers. Like this was not just one Custer that was there. Imagine as a parent, like what that meant for you.
Well, the Custer parents, they lost three sons, a grandson, and a son-in-law. So they had to be devastated, but there's nothing much about them.
That's insane. Just to even think about. So, I kind of ask this question sometimes of my guests. You get your TV show, and Netflix calls, and they're like, "Tom, you're going to be the main history, authority on this new series." And you storm into that room, and you say, first of all, what's the one thing you want to make sure that this would get right?
Well, I think take the main character seriously. Take Custer seriously. He was a war hero. He was a great action figure, so to speak. He was a very good commander. Made mistakes, but his troops were loyal to him. Take Sitting Bull seriously. He was a great leader. Take Crazy Horse seriously. Don't make anybody buffoons.
Yeah. When we look at history and historical characters, we usually envision them or define them by one event or one period of their life. Like here, we could take like a picture, right, of this one event, and we see these three larger than life figures. But while one of the larger than life figures dies here, the other two do go on, right? And their life ends almost in a whimper in comparison to these moments. Can you maybe discuss and talk a little bit about what happens to Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull?
Yeah, there's a line I have in the book when Sitting Bull is being arrested, and the line is something like Crazy Horse, his last stand was in a doorway. Crazy Horse was murdered in September 1877, dragged out of a jail. And Sitting Bull was also arrested, or in the process of being arrested, was stabbed and shot. I think they shot and stabbed. Crazy Horse was stabbed to death, so it's true that bullets could not kill him, but a bayonet could. And they were, in the case of Crazy Horse, his body was taken away by his parents. And to this day, we don't know where he's buried. Sitting Bull, we know where he's buried. But with Sitting Bull, I think it was like 2 weeks after Sitting Bull died, is when they had the Wounded Knee massacre. So they sort of dovetail those two events, tragic events, which meant the end of the Plains Indians.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back on your show.